Welcome back to our channel. Today we have 3 spine-chilling highway horror stories that will keep you on edge. Buckle up and let's dive in. These stories come from those lonely stretches of asphalt where the only sound is the wind whistling through the trees and the hum of your engine. So, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and prepare to be transported to the dark side of the open road. Mark had been driving for hours, the road stretching endlessly before him, the monotony of the highway hypnotizing him, lulling him into a trance-like state when he first saw it in his rearview mirror. A massive semi-truck, its chrome gleaming in the moonlight, reflecting the pale light like a sinister beacon, was gaining on him fast, its headlights piercing through the darkness like the eyes of a predator. Mark wasn't overly concerned at first. He thought it was just another vehicle. It was a highway after all, and trucks were a common sight. But something about the way the truck was bearing down on him, its headlights like unblinking, malevolent eyes, relentless and cold, sent a shiver down his spine, a cold dread settling in his stomach. He eased his foot down on the accelerator, the engine roaring in response, putting some distance between himself and the behemoth behind him, hoping it would be enough. He checked his rearview mirror again. The truck hadn't relented. In fact, it seemed even closer now, its presence looming larger, a hulking shadow pressing in on him, suffocating him with its proximity. A wave of adrenaline surged through Mark. This wasn't normal. He switched lanes, hoping the truck would pass him by, that it was just a coincidence. But the truck mirrored his move, as if it were toying with him, staying right on his tail, its horn blaring, a deep, guttural sound. A deep, guttural sound that seemed to echo the fear rising in Mark's chest. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles turning white with the effort. He had to lose this thing, whatever it was. He pushed his car faster, ignoring the speed limit, ignoring the logic that told him this was insane, that he was risking too much. Up ahead he saw an exit sign, a potential escape route. He swerved into the exit lane, tires screaming in protest, the truck still hot on his tail, relentless in its pursuit. He glanced over and saw the driver, or at least a shadowy figure, a dark silhouette against the bright lights of the cab, faceless and menacing. The figure seemed to be staring at him, a sense of malice radiating from the truck, a sense of malice radiating from the truck. Mark exited the highway, his heart pounding against his ribs, each beat a reminder of his fear. He risked another glance in the rearview mirror. The truck had vanished. He slowed down, pulling into a deserted gas station, the silence almost deafening, his body trembling with adrenaline and fear, his hands shaking uncontrollably. As he stepped out of his car, the cool night air hitting his face, the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. Across the street, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the streetlight, sat the semi-truck. Its engine idled, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in Mark's bones, a constant reminder of its presence. He never drove on that highway after dark again, the fear too great, the memory of that night forever etched in his mind, a haunting reminder of the Emma gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white in the darkness. The tension in her body was palpable, a reflection of the anxiety gnawing at her mind. The digital clock on her dashboard blinked 1:17 a.m., a constant reminder of the late hour and her dwindling options. Each minute that passed seemed to mock her, a cruel countdown to an uncertain fate. Her fuel gauge needle hovered precariously close to empty, a sight that sent a wave of anxiety through her. The thought of being stranded in the middle of nowhere was becoming more real with each passing mile. She had been driving for hours, the highway stretching before her like an endless black ribbon, and she hadn't seen a single sign of civilization for what felt like an eternity. The isolation was suffocating, the darkness pressing in on her from all sides. She cursed herself for not filling up her tank before she left. It was a rookie mistake, one she couldn't afford to make, especially not now. She had been so eager to get a head start on her road trip, so eager to leave the stress of the city behind that she hadn't even thought about the practicalities of a late-night drive. The excitement of the journey had clouded her judgment. Now, she was paying the price. The thrill of adventure had given way to a gnawing fear, a fear that grew with every passing second. Just as her hope began to dwindle, she saw it. A glimmer of light in the distance, a sign that she might not be alone in this desolate stretch of road. In the distance, a faint glow pierced the darkness, a beacon of salvation in the desolate landscape. It was like a mirage, too good to be true, yet she couldn't afford to ignore it. As she got closer, the glow resolved itself into the unmistakable neon flicker of a gas station sign. Relief washed over her, so potent it was almost overwhelming. Relief washed over her, so potent it was almost overwhelming. She felt a weight lift off her shoulders, her breath coming easier. She pulled off the highway, the tires crunching on the gravel driveway, and approached the gas station cautiously. The place looked deserted, but she had no other choice. Something about it felt off. The gas station seemed frozen in time, an eerie relic from the past. The air hung heavy and still, and the silence was broken only by the buzzing of fluorescent lights that flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows across the deserted lot. It was as if the place was holding its breath, waiting. The gas station itself looked ancient, a relic from a bygone era, with peeling paint and a single rusty gas pump that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The sight was both unsettling and oddly comforting. As she stepped out of her car, a figure emerged from the shadows. Her heart skipped a beat, her instinct screaming at her to get back in the car. The attendant, if you could call him that, was an older man, his face etched with wrinkles and his eyes dull and lifeless. He seemed to belong to the gas station, as much a part of it as the rusted pump. He wore a greasy uniform that looked older than time itself. The fabric was threadbare, the name tag unreadable. He didn't speak, just nodded curtly and shuffled towards her car, his movements stiff and unnatural. It was as if he were a marionette, controlled by unseen strings. Emma felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. The man's presence was unsettling, his silence even more so. There was something deeply unsettling about the man, something about his vacant stare and the way he moved, like a puppet with its strings cut loose. It was as if he were not entirely human. She watched as he began to fill her tank, the only sound the gurgling of gasoline filling her car. The noise was almost comforting in the oppressive silence. She tried to make eye contact, to offer a friendly smile, but the man seemed oblivious to her presence, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the horizon. It was as if she were invisible to him. When he finished filling her tank, she reached for her wallet, but the man shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. The gesture was slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. He pointed a gnarled finger towards a dimly lit booth, a faded sign above it reading, "No cash, pay at the booth." Emma hesitated. The booth looked like it hadn't been used in years. She didn't like this, not one bit. The whole situation felt wrong, but she was stranded and she needed to pay for the gas. But she was stranded and she needed to pay for the gas. There was no other option. She walked towards the booth, her unease growing with each step. The darkness seemed to close in around her, the silence amplifying her fear. The booth was empty, the window grimy with age. It looked abandoned, as if no one had been there for years. She peered inside, but there was no one there. The interior was dark and dusty, a testament to its long disuse. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing in the stillness. Only silence answered her. The emptiness was oppressive, the silence deafening. She turned back towards her car, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. The sense of dread was overwhelming, her instinct screaming at her to leave, and that's when she saw it. Or rather, what she didn't see. Her car was the only one in the lot. The attendant was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The gas pump stood silent and still, the hose dangling limply from its side. The scene was surreal, like something out of a nightmare. The gas station, once bathed in the eerie glow of flickering lights, was now shrouded in darkness, the only sound the wind whistling through the cracks in the building. It was as if the place had never existed. It was as if it had never been there at all, as if it were nothing more than a figment of her imagination. The reality of the situation hit her like a cold wave. Panic surged through her, cold and sharp. She felt a chill run down her spine, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She scrambled back into her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. The urgency of the moment made her movements clumsy. She started the engine, the sound almost deafening in the oppressive silence, and sped out of the gas station, her tires spitting gravel. The need to escape was overwhelming, her fear driving her forward. She started the engine, the sound almost deafening in the oppressive silence, and sped out of the gas station, her tires spitting gravel. The need to escape was overwhelming, her fear driving her forward. The highway stretched before Jake, a dark ribbon winding its way through the dense forest. The night was thick with an almost tangible silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. The only sounds were the low hum of his engine and the occasional cry of an owl piercing the stillness of the night. The rhythmic thrum of the tires on the asphalt was almost hypnotic. He was driving home after a weekend camping trip, eager to trade the solitude of the wilderness for the familiar comforts of home. The thought of a warm bed and a hot shower was all that kept him going. He had been on the road for hours, the monotony of the drive lulling him into a state of drowsy autopilot. His eyelids felt heavy, and he fought to keep them open. He rounded a bend, his headlights momentarily illuminating the trees that lined the road, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers towards the car. The shadows they cast seemed to dance and twist in the light, and that's when he saw it. A figure standing still in the middle of the road. Standing in the middle of the road, bathed in the harsh glare of his headlights, was a figure. It was as if it had materialized out of the darkness. Jake slammed on the brakes, his car skidding slightly on the asphalt. The screech of the tires echoed through the night. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drum against his ribs. He could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins. He stared at the figure, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. It was like something out of a nightmare. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long and thin, like a spider perched on the edge of its web. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Its clothes, if you could call them that, were tattered and hung loosely from its frame. They fluttered slightly in the breeze, adding to the eerie effect. But it was the eyes that truly terrified Jake. They seemed to glow with an unnatural light. They glowed an eerie red in the darkness, two burning embers that seemed to bore into his very soul. It was as if they could see right through him. He had never seen anything like it. The sheer otherworldliness of the figure was paralyzing. He honked his horn, a long, desperate blast that echoed through the silent forest. The figure didn't flinch. It was as if it was immune to the noise. It just stood there, its red eyes fixed on Jake, unwavering, unblinking. The intensity of its gaze was unnerving. A wave of primal fear washed over him, cold and paralyzing. He felt as if he were rooted to the spot. He rolled down his window, his voice trembling as he shouted, "Get out of the road!" His words were filled with a mix of fear and frustration. His words were swallowed by the silence of the night, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. The stillness was almost suffocating. The figure tilted its head, its red eyes studying Jake with an unnerving intensity. It was as if it were trying to understand him. Then, in a flash of movement so sudden it seemed to defy the laws of physics, it lunged towards the car. The speed was almost inhuman. Jake reacted instinctively, his foot slamming down on the accelerator. The car roared to life, surging forward. The car surged forward, tires screaming in protest as he swerved around the figure, narrowly avoiding a collision. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. He glanced into his rearview mirror, his heart still pounding against his ribs. The fear was still fresh, raw. The figure stood in the middle of the road, its red eyes burning into him, watching him flee. It was as if it were marking him. It didn't move, didn't pursue. It just remained there. An ominous presence in the night. It just stood there, a spectre in the darkness, its presence lingering long after it had vanished from sight. The memory of those red eyes would haunt Jake for a long time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. And remember, always stay safe on the road. There are some roads out there shrouded in darkness and whispered about in hushed tones that are best left untraveled. But for those brave enough to venture into the unknown, always remember to keep your eyes on the road your hands upon the wheel and your mind prepared for the unexpected.